For our final session of the day, titled The Future of Space Habitation, please welcome Dr. Emmanuel Urquieta, Vice Chair of Aerospace Medicine at the University of Central Florida, for a fireside chat moderated by Veronica Jijon, Associate Director at SCSP.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us all the way through the end of our AI plus Space Summit. These past 2 days, we've heard fascinating conversations spanning the entire space ecosystem, from policy to satellites to energy. So for this last session, we're going to hone in on one of the most critical elements for the future of our space habitation programs and just in general, our space presence. So that's the human body. And for this, I'm joined by Dr. Urquieta. He is the Vice Chair of Aerospace Medicine at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Urquieta, welcome.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
So I want to start off with the human element before we get into the science. Tell us a little more about your background and how you specifically got to space medicine.
Yeah, I'm a physician by training. I trained in emergency medicine, then aerospace medicine. I did some research at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio for several years, and then I transitioned to one of the NASA institutes in Houston. I was there for about 10 years as the Chief Medical Officer. And for the last almost 2 years, I've been at UCF building a new aerospace medicine program. We're the closest academic institution to the Kennedy Space Center, just 35 minutes away. UCF was created to develop the workforce for the Kennedy Space Center in the 60s. So we are really excited to build this new program.
Amazing. So when we talk about space medicine, what do we mean? Can we define the stakes for the audience? Because we know space is a hostile environment. There's radiation, microgravity, fluid shifts. Can we talk about what space medicine is and why is it so important now?
Absolutely. I want to tell you the traditional definition, the one that we have used mostly working with government and career astronauts. And that is a specialty in medicine that prevents a healthy human body getting sick in a challenging environment like spaceflight. Traditional government agencies have the luxury of having tens of thousands of applicants for 10 or 11 spots. So basically, they're able to buy down most of the medical risk, getting the uber healthy people and also mentally incredibly healthy people. Now with commercial spaceflight, we have the same extreme environment of space, very challenging to the human body, but we don't have the luxury of selecting the people who go into space, right? But rather now you have people who have the means to go to space, and now we have to bring them to a healthy enough state for them to not only survive the space flight, but actually to enjoy space flight. So I would say those are the old and the new definition of space medicine.
And I also want to ask you, we talked about this on the green room in a little bit. When we talk about missions to the moon or missions to Mars, why is this such an important aspect to consider?
Yeah, so the human body adapts after about 6 weeks of being in space. We learned this in the 60s, 70s, mostly with the Skylab mission. But most of the data that we have is, again, from healthy people. It was not really until the 90s when we started flying civilians into space. One company out of the US, they used to work with Roscosmos, called Space Adventures. In the 90s, they flew Dennis Tito, the first civilian going into space. And it was not until 2 or 3 years ago that the first all-civilian mission, Inspiration 4, flew into space. So trying to understand how someone without having the luxury of full selection capability will fare in space. So that's why it's very important these days to collect the data set.
And that context is vital because the population going to space is what's changing the most. And as you said, we're transitioning from purely government-led explorations to just commercial spaceflight. So you mentioned Inspiration 4. I want to ask you what's the difference in the health standards for these missions are compared to government-led explorations?
Yeah, so NASA has very stringent medical standards, not only for selection, but also for assignment to a mission. And all of these are public now, and you can go through those items. But they're extremely stringent. Things like you cannot have any calcium on your coronary arteries unless, or you're disqualified. You cannot have a history of kidney stones, those type of things. With commercial spaceflight, each company, they have been developing their own medical requirements. All of those requirements are based on risk assessment. Where is the risk of flying a person with X or Y medical condition in that mission? So far, pretty much all of the commercial private missions have been 2 weeks or shorter in duration, which allows you to fly people with more medical risk because, again, the human body doesn't fully adapt until 6 weeks, so you have that leeway of having someone flying and you know, on a short duration mission. But I think as we plan on going back to the moon and eventually to Mars, when these missions are going to be up to 900 days on a full transit mission to Mars, the risk assessment is going to be very different, and you will start getting into more stringent qualifications.
Perfect, and you transitioned me perfectly into my next question, which is NASA-led medicine and medical efforts and programs. We've seen data from them ranging from long-term missions to short-term missions in the past couple of years. So there's specifically the twin study, which I want to ask you to elaborate a little more, where Scott Kelly was sent to space and then he was brought back almost a year later, and he was compared to his brother, Senator Kelly, and then also the CIPHER program, which is a little more recent. So I want to ask you a little about both of them, and also how does this data compare to the data we can observe from shorter 3-day sprints to space?
Yeah, let me start with explaining why every data set that we collect in spaceflight is incredibly relevant. That's because spaceflight, human spaceflight particularly, is a data-starved field. We only have 700 plus people who have been into space since 1961, right? The entire history of human spaceflight. When you compare this to a clinical trial here on Earth, when you decide that this is the new best treatment for X or Y medical condition, you usually have to test it in tens of thousands of people. You know, ideally 50-50 male-female with different demographics, different hospitals. You have people with placebo effects. And that's how we decide what is the gold standard treatment in medicine. I imagine spaceflight, 700 plus people, and from those, only a handful, I would say less than 100, have participated in systematic longitudinal research where we can collect really data sets that are good enough and have deep enough data for us to make good assessments. NASA has been doing this for the last, I would say, 10 years with a program called NASA Standard Measures. And most of the 6-month or longer missions, they collect systematic data, pretty much the same on all astronauts. However, all of these data sets do not get collected until about 2 weeks when you're in space. Usually the first 2 weeks are the most physiologically challenging for humans to adapt. Most people, up to 80% of people who go to space, they develop nausea and vomit pretty much immediately when they go to space, and it takes about 4 or 5 days to go back to normal. So it's incredibly important to collect that data. But we don't have the first days of the mission, which is, to your point, what we now have in commercial spaceflight, missions that are 3 days up to 2 weeks. So all of the data we can collect on those very early stages of physiologic change is incredibly valuable, so that we can then extrapolate that with what NASA has been collecting for several years, and we can have better understanding of how early the different systems in the human body start to change, and how can we start developing early countermeasures or treatments for things like space motion sickness and others that are pretty relevant on short duration missions.
Amazing. And I would like to bring this back down to Earth, specifically to Florida. So Central Florida is already a massive hub for launch and for manufacturing. And space is contributing about $6 billion annually to the state economy. But you're building something different. You're building, as a founding director of the Center for Aerospace and Extreme Environments Medicine, you're creating a program to train a very niche subject. So can you talk to us a little more about that, and why Florida? Why is Central Florida the best place to do this?
Yeah, we're the closest, from UCF, from my perspective, we're the closest academic health sciences center to the Kennedy Space Center, where pretty much all of the human spaceflight activity happens, right? In fact, I was at Cape a few days ago, and they're already building some of the Starship launch pads there. So it's just a matter of time until we'll see hundreds of people launching from there on a single rocket ship multiple times a day. So the throughput of medical care going from a crew of 4 people, which is what we have now on most of the spaceflight capabilities, that usually take months or years to select them, flight certify them, train them, and get them ready for a mission. Moving that to orders of magnitude now, you have 100 people that the goal is that it will be as easy to fly as you getting on an airplane and flying from Orlando to DC. Training the workforce to be able to fulfill those capabilities and doing it as fast as possible is a very different mindset and requirements that we are developing to fulfill those needs for commercial spaceflight.
Amazing. And do you think this effort should be scaled up to a national level, or do you think it's good to focus in Florida?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much the commercial spaceflight companies that are developing human spaceflight capabilities are different states, mostly Houston and California, close to LA. Those are the 2 hubs for most of these companies. The challenge is that all of those, from a medical perspective, like here in the US, you have to get a medical license on each state, right? So if you want to practice in California, you need a medical license there. The requirements are significantly different from Texas or Florida. So having a training that is harmonized from the capabilities perspective, and then moving those operational capabilities to the different states is something that we will need to have. And there's already models there. The NFL, for example, the physicians in charge of X or Y team, if they go to another state to a game or to a play, they can practice in the context of those patients who are the NFL players. So we're trying to have something similar for human spaceflight, so that the physician from a commercial spaceflight company, they will be able to treat the physicians, the astronauts in another state from the same context that the NFL does it these days.
I want to double down on the data issue that you mentioned, and I want to ask, how does the proximity to the launch sites affect the type of data you can access and the type of research you and your students can do?
Yeah, that's a great question. These days, most of the data, the one that brings us most of the depth of data, is what we can get from an omics perspective. This is how you understand gene expression, proteins, and basically everything genetic-wise. For that, you mostly need to collect blood, and that blood needs to be processed usually within 2 hours of collection. So most commercial off-the-shelf services, if you have the phlebotomist on demand, usually it's Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, right? And we know that launches and landings usually get delayed, and quite often they end up landing at 3 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday. And instead of landing in Pensacola, now it's in Tampa. So you need to have a capability that gives you the flexibility of deploying clinical grade research tools regardless of the location at the time. Luckily, in the state of Florida, we have that capability. So for research, I would say that having a location close enough to the Cape and close enough to all of the other landing locations in Florida is key to get that depth of data that requires that short window of time from the time that literally you get the needle in the astronaut until blood's over in the centrifuge being processed, 2 hours.
So I think this is the perfect time to integrate AI into the conversation. How do you see AI changing and shaping the way this program is going to grow and evolve in the next couple of years, let's say next 5 years? How do you currently use AI? How do you think you're going to use AI in the next years?
Yeah, I think AI is one of the most critical capabilities and one of the most critical skill sets that we can give to younger students, right? The way that you train people is changing dramatically day after day. Having them, allow them to use large language models, you cannot say no, you have to open to that and do it in a way that they still learn, but they get the maximum benefit of using those tools. Now, from a medical perspective, a mission to Mars is a perfect example of where we are really using AI as the enabling capability from a medical perspective for that mission. It's going to be a 900-day mission. Once you commit to that mission, you are there for 900 days. You cannot just come back if a medical condition happens. On low Earth orbit, we have the luxury of having pretty much 24/7 communications with Earth through the TDRS satellites. So if there's a medical condition, you can grab the phone, and there's going to be 50 physicians in Houston ready to tell you what to do. And if it comes to worse, you can deorbit the vehicle and come back to Earth in a matter of hours. The moon is going to be 3 or 4 days if something happens, and communication is going to be close to real time. But a mission to Mars, when you are on the surface or orbiting Mars, because of the sheer distance between the Earth and Mars, is going to be about 40 minutes of time-delayed communications. So if there's a catastrophic medical condition, we usually have what we call the golden hour, which is 60 minutes when you have to initiate treatment for a life-threatening condition. You're getting close to that window, and if you say, Houston, can you hear me? And then 40 minutes later, yes, we can hear you, right? So you cannot provide medical care that way. So we'll need to develop a system that we call Earth Independent Medical Operations, or IMO, that would absolutely require AI and large language models to be able to initiate the diagnosis and the treatment for a crew of 4 people. Most likely one of them is going to be the physician, but what are the odds that the physician is the first person that is going to get sick on the mission, right? So you need to have that capability regardless of who is going to be the person rendering the medical care. So for that mission, it's going to be absolutely critical, AI, to enable that mission.
So you mentioned earlier the concept of a 3Ps medicine: predictive, preventive, and personalized, and that is also enabled by AI. Do you see this being a part of only space missions, or how do you integrate this space medicine research into the way we do medicine on Earth?
Yeah, I think everything, pretty much the way developed for space has, particularly on the medical domain, has direct applications to terrestrial healthcare, particularly populations that are isolated, don't have readily access to healthcare, have to travel long distances to a clinic. And really the paradigm that we're shifting is that instead of the patient having to go to the clinic or to the healthcare system, you have to bring the healthcare system to the patient. In this case, the healthcare system to the astronaut, right? On a mission to Mars, the physician cannot go on another rocket ship and dock with the vehicle. But the healthcare system needs to be there when the astronauts are going to need it. So if you think of isolated populations on Earth, or even on the military domain, places like submarines, right, that they have to be isolated for 9 months with no communications, and you have 1 or 2 people providing medical care who are not physicians. Refugee camps, all of those really isolated areas would really take advantage of a system like this.
Amazing. And then your program is said to be multidisciplinary, encompass various different areas of education. So I want to ask exactly which ones do you think are most important that should work together to achieve this type of medicine that works more autonomously and at a distance? So which programs specifically would you want to highlight from?
Yeah, that's a great question. Traditionally, human spaceflight and space medicine has been pretty siloed. Very difficult to work with engineers and with other disciplines because the way that they think and the way that usually the time when the engineering pipeline brings the physicians or the healthcare professionals is really at the end of the development of the rocket ship. And decisions are made without consulting physicians or people who are going to use the medical systems or the medical architecture within a vehicle. So I think one of the best things that we can do is train on parallel the engineers and the physicians. And that's what we're trying to do with this program, having capstone projects or research projects where we have the physicians and the engineers solving a common problem, bringing their different tool sets and capabilities so they can understand how the other one thinks. So I would say engineering is one of the most critical ones, and of course these days computer engineering and AI and large language models are as critical as any other disciplines in the context of space medicine.
Okay, and given the city we're in, how do you see policy play into that?
I think it's critical. Commercial spaceflight is just increasing and growing at an incredibly fast pace. We're expecting the commercial spaceflight is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar economy in the next 5 years or so. And policy needs to catch up with the fast pace at which commercial spaceflight, particularly human spaceflight, is growing. The ethics of doing research in spaceflight, what are the policies and the laws that apply there, right? So far, the FAA only has jurisdiction to give launch and landing licenses once you cross the Van Karman line and you do human research in space. Pretty much there's no entity or there's no legislation up there on overseeing research in human spaceflight. So I think it's incredibly critical that the policy is involved in human spaceflight as well.
Awesome. We have just a few minutes left, so I want to look forward. How do you hope this program will change in the next 5 years? And the industry in general, where do you see it in the next couple of years? What type of data do you need, and how do you see this industry grow?
Yeah, I think it's going to be growing incredibly fast, mostly commercial. That's what we have been seeing. Even the vehicles that are going to land on the moon are fully commercial, right? We have multiple options that are fully commercial, and the commercial spaceflight companies are going to take advantage of those vehicles and those developments to bring private individuals into space. Eventually, going to the moon and Mars. So I think as fast as we can train the workforce to be ready for that really incredibly high throughput number of individuals flying into space, we're going to be on a better shape and being as nimble as possible, because rather than having one spacecraft or one launch vehicle, we're going to have multiple ones, and each of them have different requirements, different standards, different G loads during launch and landing. So working with the mindset that each vehicle is different is going to be key to be able to support all of these new commercial spaceflight companies.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Urquieta, for your time, for making the way over here, and for your pioneer work in this field.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Ladies and